Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janice Whitaker, Administrator of the Center for Geriatric Nursing Excellence. It's my pleasure to serve as host of the CGNE seminar series. I'd also like to thank Jenny Rank, our Education Program Specialist, for all her assistance with implementing the seminars, and Amy Caputo, CGNE Marketing Communications Specialist, for not only doing the marketing for the series, but helping to monitor the chat today. This program is being provided by the Teresa Neese and Helen Diskovich Center of Geriatric Nursing Excellence at Penn State Ross and Carol Neese College of Nursing, in collaboration with the Office of Outreach and Professional Development, the Center for Nursing Research, and Age-Friendly Care Pennsylvania. Today's seminar, Cannabinoid Drug Interaction Review, will be presented by Dr. Paul Kocis, a clinical pharmacist at Penn State Milton S. Hershey Medical Center. Before we begin the presentation, we do have some disclosures and announcements. Penn State Ross and Carol Neese College of Nursing is approved with distinction as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by Pennsylvania State Nurses Association, an accredited approver by the American Nurses Credentialing Centers Commission and Accreditation. Participants with a valid RN license who attend the entire nursing continuing professional development program can earn either 1 contact hour or 1 pharmacotherapeutic contact hour for APRNs. Partial contact hours are not awarded. The topic of this education is clinical. However, our presenter does not have any relevant financial relationships with ineligible companies. Just to make all participants aware that we are recording this seminar. And if you have any questions during the seminar, you're welcome to put them into the chat, or you can raise your hand, and Jenny and Amy will be monitoring that. And if you raise your hand, we'll unmute you so you can share your comment or your question aloud. We do invite all participants, and especially RNs that want contact hours, to complete the post-event evaluation. The link will be put into the chat towards the end of this session, and we will give everyone a few minutes to complete it in the moment if you choose, or you can save the link and it will come up later. And I apologize, it won't come into the chat, it'll be on your browser at the end of the session, but we will end the session a few minutes early, so it'll pop up. You can complete it then, you complete it later, or you can complete it after getting an email with the link in it that will be sent to you within 24 hours. Again, we encourage everyone to complete the evaluation because it gives us important feedback on this seminar as well as future seminars. And then for nurses that complete all of the requirements, you will receive your certificates within a month of the seminar. If you have any questions at all, you can always reach out to us at cgne@psu.edu. Next, I'd like to introduce Olivia Rubio, one of our PhD graduate affiliate students, who has played an important role in the Age-Friendly Care Pennsylvania project, including qualitative data analysis and resource development for the Living with Dementia Community Education Program. We really appreciate all her contributions. As a nurse focused on gerontology, Olivia is very engaged with our center, and we appreciate her introducing our speaker today.
Thank you, Janice. I hope there's not too much feedback here, but I appreciate the introduction. So Dr. Paul Kocis, since graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy, Dr. Kocis additionally obtained his Doctor of Pharmacy, PharmD degree, and his Master of Public Health in Biostatistics and Epidemiology. He continues to participate in a number of workshops, certifications, and has initiated and developed a number of IRB-approved research projects. For the past 17 years, he has been a clinical pharmacist in the Anticoagulation Clinic, Department of Pharmacy, Disease State Management at the Penn State Health Milton S. Hershey Medical Center. In the anticoagulation clinic, they manage the warfarin regimens of the most medically complex patients, left ventricular assist device, LVAD, cardiovascular patients, and from the hematology, oncology, transplant, and neurology patient populations. During his presentation, Dr. Kocis will further explain his ongoing work with the cannabinoids and drug-to-drug interactions. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for the kind words, introductions. Can you see my slide? Okay. No, thanks, everybody. It was glad to be invited. And I guess a little bit of an introduction to this. With my primary role being in anticoagulation, we do an awful lot with drug interactions. And I guess one thing I'll share is that years ago, I used to do a lot with long-term care institutional pharmacy. This kind of predates my time here at the Med Center, but I could appreciate the seniors group, geriatric group, and whether it would be the Beers criteria or other concerns. One thing that I'm seeing here is that back in 2019, I was asked to get a list of medications that might have a potential drug interaction, and that led into one step. It led into another step of an actual publication. That publication had data. That data was then being requested. So it sort of went from one step to the next. So I just want to help explain how a Coumadin clinic pharmacist got involved in this area, let alone for the drug interactions. Now with the cannabinoids, this is focused not so much from a usage standpoint as it is from maybe a patient safety care. And also, like when we tie in seniors medications, warfarin, of course, is being used. Now, granted, maybe not as much as it years past because of the DOACs, but then you're also looking at one other topic or narrative I like to mention is that cannabinoids, sort of what I term get a pass, meaning that they're, quote, safer than the opioids. Now, with the opioids, yes, more fatalities, cannabinoids, no. But I felt that when I was doing all this research, when it started with just a list of potential drug interactions, that back then I could only find things that had to do with increased sedation, increased appetite stimulation, and I couldn't find anything about how cannabinoids affected other medications. So for this presentation, we're really going to look at drug interactions. We're going to incorporate parts for the seniors, the geriatric patient, but also more importantly, we're basically looking at from how cannabinoids affect other medications. Case in point, years ago, we would see patient come in. Now, 15 years ago, it's different than now. There's medical cannabis, at least in Pennsylvania, but 15 years ago, it was illicit. And back then, we couldn't tell if it was maybe, back then, because illicit, if there was other substances being used that might have affected the INR, or let alone maybe drinking that might affect the INR. So with that being said, some of us may remember that the stigma right now isn't what it was years ago. I think some of us may remember that if there was any history of marijuana smoking in college, that would often derail a presidential campaign. And so with the Agricultural Improvement Act, which came out also known as the Farm Bill in 2018, there are just a slew of CBD products in the community. Some of them are not pure and some have THC, but that is more information for another time. A couple, I guess it would have been not this November, but the prior November, but just to be in compliance with the request, I think it was the last 2 years or last 3 years here, but I participated in a one-time work advisory group for education. And this would have been, I believe, November, December of like a year and a half ago, like 2021, I believe. So I listed it just for particulars, but I don't have an ongoing relationship right now. Now with the outline, we're going to look at the objectives in the next slide, reference the Farm Bill a little bit better. But basically, we're going to, discuss or bring into being terms that we use all the time: enzymes, substrates, agonists, antagonists, receptors. And I did want to focus particularly, I have a lot of slides for absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, these being the pharmacokinetic applications. And I also have a slide as relate to aging. In preparation for this, and just to kind of refresh my memory on a few things, so really the metabolism in of itself as you age doesn't change all that much. It's more or less the other influences. And with those slides, I'll kind of bring that to your attention. Brought in some about pharmacogenomics, of course, the drug-drug interactions. And with the project that I've been working on these past couple of years, 2 years ago, developed or put into production what we call Cander for cannabinoid drug interaction review. And this is sort of what I'm hoping to be or achieve as a platform. So you look up the medications of interest and you're able to print, email those, and then you can switch back, whether it be CBD, THC, or a combination of both. And I have some examples to share for that. The other part to this is, okay, well, you have this knowledge, you have all this, what do you do with it? So I wanted to tie it in with some of the national patient safety goals. So far as objectives, we're going to look at the pharmacokinetic principles, the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, and more specifically as it relates to the geriatric patient population. Again, as mentioned earlier, we're looking at the cannabinoids and how that may affect the metabolism of other medications. That's really the hallmark of CANDIR and really what the theme has been for the last couple of years. Also, I'm looking at this from, we spoke offline, the leadership and one of the other plans I have is to standardize placement on electronic medical record. And lastly, I mentioned this just in the last slide about how the drug interactions can be printed. Cander has been translated. We translated into 11 languages, so you can print and email the results also and view in 11 languages. Those languages were, well, let me go to that slide and explain further. Now, going back to the Farm Bill, a lot of this has been heard. This is done every 5 years. And right now there's a delay getting this. This should have been done last year. Now we're actually in 2003, if it was 5 years. Now with that, basically the hallmarks were the 0.3% THC. And that was related that it's really the same plant. So my mentor explained to me once before, he says, you have the exact same plant. We'll say it's a petunia plant, but you go to the greenhouse and you get a red petunia plant, red flowers, and then you get a white petunia plant, red flowers. It's the same plant, it just they express different colors. So using that as an example is how you could kind of rationalize out how a marijuana plant is okay because it has CBD and the other one has THC predominantly. But the hallmarks here you're going to hear of 0.3%. And one of the things that they're doing with the Farm Bill coming up is they're looking at making it 1% for another reason, that for those who are really trying to abide by the law, the fact is the farmers are able to do this realistically because of a margin of error. In reference to, we have the family name of the Cannabicea, and then the genus species are Cannabis sativa and also C. ruderalis. And then under Cannabis sativa, you have the sativa plant and also indica. So those talk about the different species. And again, under sativa, then you have how the same plant can produce either marijuana or hemp. Again, using the petunia plant as an example with the different colored flowers. Back in January of 2023, there was back and forth between FDA, Congress, a lot of other like businesses, etc. Everybody's looking for guidance from the FDA. And it was determined in January of 23 that the FDA concluded that one thing for certain, or two things. One thing is that the current food, supplements, herbals, that pathway is not appropriate for cannabidiol. And likewise, they also asked for, they felt that some of the decision-making should be enacted by Congress. So there's a delay there. But it was nice to know that at least some process forward has been achieved. I'd made mention that I had a list of drug interactions that led to a publication, this being the publication, and you could see that here, the green color. This is not by accident. I chose green for the THC preparations, Delta-9 THC, and then there's a prescription synthetic version called Nabilone, and then there's also dronabinol. And I remember this back in the 1980s, dronabinol being a prescription. I believe it was a control 3 at the time. And that at the time was for, I believe, HIV patients. Then it had an additional indication for oncology patients. And then you have to the right, the CBD, which is like hemp rope or hemp plant. And so you have the prescription that really kind of brought cannabidiol to the forefront, because this is the prescription medication for childhood seizures. Now with CBD, with the Farm Bill back in 2018, there's literally been a rush of new products to the market. And then you have a combination. There is a medication called Sativex, which is a 1-to-1 THC to CBD. And it's not available in the United States. It's marketed and approved in just about, I don't know, 20 some states, but for some reason, it just hasn't met the threshold, at least regarding the studies. And then you throw in recently, at least in Pennsylvania, the medical cannabis and the extracts. I like this slide. There is an error here. We actually borrowed it from another publication, but the part to here is stating that there's naturally occurring, which we've already talked about, plant-based and THC. And then you have endogenous. So that would be CBD1, CBD2, the receptors, as you're well aware, hearing from time to time again, especially when talking about physiology and then pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics. And then lastly, you have synthetic, the neocannabinoids. The example here would be something you might be hearing or seeing is Delta-8. Now, because of the way the Farm Bill legislation was handled, that had a path forward, and it just basically explained how Delta-9 THC, which is the most common, well-known, and CBD were to be treated. Delta-9 THC still illegal, very much so, not approved in Pennsylvania or in federal still. CBD now has that, taken that designation as far as it's now over the counter. Delta-8 has seen somewhat of a resurgence, and that was sort of not taken account with the legislation. So going back to the Farm Bill in 2023 now, or 24 this year, if it goes through, aside from the 1% of Delta-9 THC, looks like they're gonna put some information in about these synthetic preparations. Delta-8 is actually expressed in the marijuana plant like Delta-9, but Delta-8 is such a small amount. To get anything measurable from it, it has to be done in the lab. So you can see the workaround that has been handled there. Although we're primarily talking about drug interactions, I had shared earlier that I remember working in a SICU years ago, and you have these patients that come in through unexpected means, certainly not a plan by any stretch if they come in for a trauma surgery. But there were two instances I remember, like yesterday. One was someone who were having DTs, and so I remember medicinal alcohol having to be used to combat that. And the other was someone who has a role with tobacco cessation, was having a lot of issues related to that. So I remember there was several patches. It just highlights the idea that there are, again, not going into treatment too much, at least with the cannabinoids, but I think awareness is very helpful. The conversation I had before this CE started, or speaking engagement started, talked about how you ask patients, do you have alcohol, or do you smoke, or do you drink alcohol? I feel that this is something that would be very important to note. And then likewise, you place it on the medication list. as opposed to maybe just a note, a physician note somewhere else. Now, the extent of this, I just want to bring, I think, depending on when you learned enzyme substrates, in this slide here, we kind of learned this two-dimensional route. Now everybody's probably learning more from a three-dimensional here on the left-hand side. The medication doesn't show very well because it's sort of like a blue, but it goes in with the green. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at the two-dimensional, it's really three-dimensional. So you have a lot of different contact points. And this is just meant to explain that you have an enzyme combines with a substrate, and then you have different types of inhibition, some inducements as well. Again, I spoke briefly about CB1 and CB2, and this being the endogenous. And so as far as the light green denoting this, the CBD1, that's typically seen in central nervous system areas. Likewise, the darker blue tends to be more in immune tissues, and both 1 and 2, CB1 and CB2, are more equally distributed in peripherally. Now, I do have a lot of slides here for you, and so I did provide references. On this slide, it's referenced, but the take-home message here is, I mentioned before, delta 8, right? And then you have the different predominant receptors, but also just for learning purposes, not to memorize by any stretch, but if you hear agonist or antagonist or unclear, then you're going to see other slight variations, like it's a partial antagonist, because just because there's a drug interaction doesn't necessarily mean it's a contraindication, and certainly doesn't mean it really depends on how much of an influence it would be. So basically what we're doing here from the presentation, we're going to focus on the pharmacokinetic properties, the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. So this is pretty self-explanatory. It talks about, oral ingestion being the primary absorption here. And then likewise, the metabolism, absorption, distribution, metabolism, then the excretion. Also here, just about every absorption route here I've seen with the cannabinoids, or at least read someone's tried just about everything. The one part I don't know if I've seen was the ocular delivery, but give them time. So now with absorption as related to the aging process, we're looking at kind of focusing this from the gerontology perspective of the aging process. So we talked on the slide before regarding orally. And so not to forget that you have parenteral, subcutaneous, IM, IV, and also then you have topical administration. And where this comes into being is, as you age, you have, at least historically, you would have less and less subcutaneous fat, where your physician explained to me years ago that as you get older, your skin gets thinner and the linings of your organ systems get thinner. And so what I was reading prior to going into this presentation was talking about subcutaneous being less and less. So it may theoretically be some bearing on topical placement. Now, when you talk about bioavailability, what's interesting is that if you, using THC as an example, if you orally ingest THC, it's 5% bioavailability. If you smoke it, I believe it's upwards of 100. So that's why you get that rush, you get that impact, and that's why you get that big delay, and maybe not as a pronounced effect if you had it orally. And so that, I think, explains bioavailability the best. And then again, when you get to age-related, we're really looking at, it's not so much from a metabolism standpoint, but we're looking more from physiological changes and decreased blood flow to tissues and the GI tract, which right here would impact what I explained here about how the medications were administered. Tissues for topical, GI tract for oral versus a parenteral. Gastric pH changes. So you have a patient that is on omeprazole, well, that lowers the pH in the stomach. Protein binding, we have another slide to talk about that a little bit more, but that has to do with patients' diet, and also how much, not so much calories, but say like animal meats and whatnot, and likewise physiological changes, reduced cardiac output. This explains the distribution, and here we have something with mentioning about the protein binding and blood flow, and then you get the effect. I like this slide at the top right. I like how it shows how it diffuses. You can see it goes into the systemic circulation certainly quicker after absorption, and then it starts getting diffused throughout the body. One thing I'll mention about, I do have a slide that talks about the protein binding. I often see something in the literature or in prescribed information that talks about highly protein bound, and I probably spend a good portion of time over multiple, reaching out to multiple people, and I couldn't see an actual percentage cutoff. I used 85% because the other medications that had referencing the medication as highly protein bound seemed to be at least 85% or above. So I used that more conservatively. I talked to others, and the best I could get is what I call expert opinion. And I would get maybe, talk to one person, they say 90, talk to somebody else, they're saying 95. I went as far as talked to the FDA, and there was no information that I could discern. Why this is important is, although we're talking about, we'll be talking about the cytochrome P450, UGT as far as metabolism, but protein binding also has some bearing on drug interactions as well. So for distribution, with focusing on the aging process, again, with distribution, we're talking about body weight, but also body composition. Say you have somebody that's 100 pounds, that's 5'2", but that same 100-pound person, 6'2". So certainly you have a different BMI. And that ultimately, the absorption would influence the onset, strength, and duration, which leads into distribution of the medication. Here with the protein binding, oftentimes, as I mentioned before, the dietary protein as far as component of your diet, and then serum albumin. And so basically, highly protein bound medications, two examples, warfarin and phenytoin. Now, the journal article that I referenced before, this actually, 25 references here. This goes back to that journal article, different reference. I could find it for you. This just highlights where I termed 85%, sort of our cutoff, just to kind of look at. And so you can make an argument that there are drug interactions for, say, phenytoin, because it's listed as 90%, cyclosporin 90%. Now, looking at metabolism, a lot of these you hear, try to clarify a few things, but phase 1 metabolism is related to cytochrome P450, the liver, which you normally will hear about. So again, cytochrome P450, and that would be your 3A4, your 2C9, and your 2C19. Other terms would be reduction hydrolysis. Not really important for this, but just if you could get phase 1 metabolism, cytochrome P450, that's your first. So you have your drugs and the first phase of metabolism where the cytochrome P450 is oxidizing the drugs. Now, you'll have different types. So in this perspective, these are called xenobiotics, which is a fancy term for medications or drugs. And that could be anything that you take, prescribed, but it could be an inadvertent toxin that you're exposed to. Then you have phase 2 metabolism, and basically here is the other is UGT. So again, looking at this schematic, then sometimes I don't see this too much, but sometimes you see phase 3 metabolism. I only bring this up as a topic of discussion because if you hear about reading with the medications and looking at prescribing information, talk about ATP binding cassette or solute carrier transporters, it's just a different phase of metabolism. They also call post phase 2. But in summary, if you glean that phase 1 metabolism is cytochrome P450, phase 2 metabolism is primarily UGT. I like this slide because it brings some attention to, so a lot of the newer medications that are coming up now are what we would call like biosimilars. It's different than what it was 30 years ago. You know, I can remember 30, 40 years ago when I started out in pharmacy, even in late part of high school or early college. You know, back then there were no generics. Everything was a brand name medication. And then by the time I was end of college, the generics started coming out. And now a lot of the newer medications, you're hearing about CAR T therapy or biosimilars or different type of medications. But this basically explained that so when you're looking at potential drug interactions, you're looking at, you know, okay, the newer medications, are they still influenced by, say, cytochrome P450 and then 52%, and then with the UGT? They're not really going to discuss these because when we're talking about cannabinoids, and again, we're referencing how cannabinoids affect other medications. And so primarily P450 UGT are what we're going to focus on. And this basically means that these are the amount of medications. And so this slide was for small molecule IV and oral medications that were approved between 2006 and 2015. Now, bringing us to the, I guess, relationship to the seniors and geriatric part, you know, we're looking here. Remember, physician told me that, you know, the skin changes and also the linings of all the major organs. But, you know, absorption can be affected by the gut wall, especially if someone's had a colectomy. They now have short gut syndrome. And then by version of absorption through the GI, the liver metabolizes most of that. Again, I'm discerning difference between if it was listed transdermally, not transdermally through a skin patch, or even a buccal administration, say nitroglycerin through the tongue. So again, this is GI absorption. Liver metabolizes most of what was entered in through the gastrointestinal. And then little, I guess, reminder is the liver can actually have an excreting ability, and that goes into bile. Then also you have something called the first pass effect for elimination. And this is really what happens is that after you're factoring in protein binding and you're factoring in the fact that the medication hit the liver, you have an element of unbound active medication, but that's markedly reduced. Oftentimes, that's why you'll have a IV or IM preparation if needed for either faster use. And then you get into the aging process, liver size, and hepatic blood flow, they both decrease. So again, a little bit more deeper dive into phase 1 metabolism. With this kind of envision this as your liver, although your liver typically isn't round, and you look at the percentages. So, you know, we got to thinking, okay, well, we focused on the 3A4 and also 2C19 and 2C9 is primarily where there's going to be metabolism, whether the cannabinoid inhibits or induces medications through these processes. So you're looking at this as about, just quick math here, about 18, but 48%, closer to 50%. My memory's, I got my math right, or approaching 50, yeah, approaching 50%. So you could see the rest are other enzymes that you might have heard about. Another one that sometimes we'll run into more is C1A2, and this is where smoking. And so the actual smoke, or the how to term it, but the smoking of tobacco smoke will actually influence enzymes. Now, with reference to the human liver, oftentimes you think of cytochrome P450, and I actually said that earlier in the presentation. Typically, you know that to be in the liver, but note that it could be in the small intestine. So not as predominant, but at least from a volume standpoint, but you could see it's represented more than you would think. So for the liver, 39%, this is actually 82%. Now, it's much more predominant in the liver than it is in the intestine, but you can see the breakdown. I mentioned earlier about antibiotics. That could be also a name for medications, or it could also be used for the toxins. And each of these are here represented only one time. And I'm looking at my time here, so I'm gonna also, one thing from a genomic standpoint, you'll see that you have rapid metabolizers, intermediate, poor. I like this slide because I think it really is the hallmark for today's discussion, is that the older patient, things decline as time goes on. So in this perspective, you're looking at P450 enzyme activity, and at least from a 2C19 standpoint, it does decrease. 2D6 kind of holds true, and this one is for medications like antipsychotics, and antidepressants. A lot of them, CNS, tend to be in here. And then 3A4 kind of bucks a trend. It actually tends to increase. For the phase 2, sort of similar to what we did with 3A4, with the metabolism of the cannabinoids affecting other meds, 1A9 and 2B7 are primarily. And again, this is just a different representation. We talked earlier how cytochrome P450 is in the liver. It's also in the small intestine. This is meant to explain. Now I've seen, this is UGT. I've seen it. This was from either it was done incorrectly, but I've also seen it UTG. At least in this journal article it was. And you can see 1A9 and 2B7 represented here. But again, it's smaller amount in the intestine, same thing with here. This just a nice demographic for excretion. Historically, it's through kidney, but it could be respiratory as well. So one thing that's of note, I remember years ago, young pharmacist, where you'd get prescribing information. A little known fact with prescribing information, why they call it a PI, package insert, is that years ago, that little bitty piece of paper was inside a bottle. And so hence where they came up with package insert. Then as years gone by, then they started just adhering it to the top of the bottle. And then now I don't know if I assume they still have it as part of the packaging, but certainly everything is online references. But back earlier, many years ago, the information was not standardized in certain sections. So this is looking at prescribing information from 2006 on, and you could see that everything has a certain area. Now, if for some reason there was no information on special populations, then it would go from 7 then to 9. It wouldn't change it wouldn't change the numbering scheme. Where you want to focus on is section 7 and also section 12. And this would be where the information is for prescribing information. One thing to note is when you go to the prescribing information, when you go to the prescribing information, you're looking at, and you have to be careful when you're reading prescribing information, because they'll have it kind of going both ways. They'll have how cannabinoids affect warfarin, or how warfarin affects a cannabinoid. So you have to be careful how you're reading it, because it could be different enzyme systems. And so again, focusing, this project has been mostly on how, again, cannabinoids affecting other medications. Also with drug-drug interactions, if you look at this reference, there's an FDA information that defines, what is considered strong, moderate, or weak inducer. Same thing with an inhibitor. Basically, an inhibitor inhibits the metabolism. So in case of warfarin, say you have THC inhibits the metabolism of warfarin, so the warfarin level is higher, hence INR is higher, hence potential bleeding based on a high number. And again, this references what I said a few minutes ago. If this is where it's really important, this would be an Epidiolex prescribing information. This is effects of other drugs on an Epidiolex. Now, my focus all along with this project has been how Epidiolex affects other drugs. And it goes back to the theme that I've been trying to stay true to, was talking about the messaging that, okay, it's safer, but don't forget about other medications. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to go through a couple things here. With medications, NTIs, narrow therapeutic index medications, warfarin, of course, being one of them. Narrow therapeutic index means that the difference between therapeutic, toxic is not much of a doesn't take much of a change to have that happen. And this is the FDA reference I talked about. So it's recently been updated. It's actually, I missed it on this slide. It's actually been updated since 2022. So take a look at it when you can. I have the reference shared for you. And so going to what we're talking about, I had lists of medications, then it continued to grow, continued to grow. We're in a digital age. How do we access this where we can do it quickly? So I developed Cander, and its references as cannabinoid, CANN for cannabinoid, DIR for drug interaction review. It's since been copyrighted, but the take-home message here is that we're looking at, if you go here onto the right-hand side, this is if I pick Spanish, it actually puts the Spanish word in for Russian or Spanish word in for Polish. I was a little bit humbled. I did a CE for a group in France. I did it remotely, and you just assume everybody knows English, and they're giving me instructions in French. So I'm a little bit lost there, trying to adhere what they wanted me to do, but it was humbling to say the least. Likewise, here are the 11 languages that we have, and this is just in English, but if you chose Chinese, French, German, this would be the words for whatever dialect that you chose. This here, again, THC is green, CBD brown for like hemp rope, and this is not an earth tone, but this is the best I got to kind of coincide. This talks about the different choices that we have. This goes to the figure that I showed from that journal article earlier in the presentation. And basically, you pick one of these. These were just highlighted, but if you say, okay, so THC, CBD. So say I picked here. Okay, so say I picked here, and then you get to this screen and you pick your object medication, and you can see at the top it says THC, CBD, and medical cannabis X to Y. Sativex, as I mentioned before, is 1-to-1. In the medical cannabis world, I don't actively participate or practice, but they could have 3-to-1 or 1-to-3, and it could be 3-to-1. THC to CBD is 1, or it could be 1-to-3, where CBD is more prominent. What happens here is whatever, as you type in the words, it'll start. So if you put WA, it will go to warfarin, but this will pick up other words that have a W in it. And with your objects chosen, you could view what here. So this is just using warfarin. Now this right now is meant for the healthcare provider. We do have limited capability right now for patients and caregivers, where I don't know if it's 3rd or 4th grade English or comprehension. Certainly this is not. This whole project was started out to help aid healthcare providers, but the idea is to use this as a platform and hopefully like a tear-off sheet or something to print out for your patient. So there is a section there for results for one other thing too. Since we're in a new world, we're looking at FDA. I included FDA MedWatch. There's, if you want to comment back, there's an email embedded, and here is another reference. Right here, we have some resources, like a couple journal articles. Here, if you print, it'll print a PDF. Email will also email a PDF. We're going to end up having a back button added, so that brings us not just to the prior screen, but more to where if you want to go choose another avenue to go. Likewise, here's the object again, data. This just further explains if you choose email, it'll self-populate. In this case, it self-populated to Cander, but the output would go to whatever system you were on. So it auto-populates your email. And again, this represents the MedWatch. This is what the paper looks like, or the page for your information, and this would be geared on the fact that for a healthcare provider. And one thing I did was I placed it so it goes in alphabetical order. It wasn't like first in, first out. So whatever you put in, we have an ability to make sure it's always alphabetical. And that is that. So if there's any questions, in assuming time remaining, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kocis, for a very interesting and informative presentation. So much to learn about this category of drugs, and certainly you have a wealth of knowledge and expertise in this area. And congratulations on the amazing work that you did to develop Cander. So one of my first questions is Cander an available resource, readily available for healthcare professionals right now? And, you know, if I was a nurse practitioner working in long-term care, for example, and I wanted to, you know, explore potential drug-to-drug interactions, how would I access this resource?
Yeah, and it's a good point. I guess the one slide I had the URL, but I
Okay,
just I'll put it in the chat.
awesome.
It's CANN-DIR.psu.edu. The other part to it is if you just Google it, you should be able to find it, or through other mechanisms like, you know, cannabinoid drug interaction review, what have you. But good question. You know, this hasn't been the effort, how this happened, Center Medical Innovation, very supportive of this idea. And I was able to get computer science students from Penn State Harrisburg help out. And this was 4 years ago. We didn't know where didn't know where we're going with this. It was sort of like, okay, a little bit of a leap of faith, and this might work, this may not work. And 4 versions later, here we are. But it's been in 86 countries, and of course, it's been viewed. We chose the languages because I wanted to focus on languages that we supported here at the Med Center. And believe it or not, using Nepali. So if you look at, you know, rural health for that matter, outside of Nepal, the country, the 3 biggest pockets of Nepalese are Atlanta, Georgia, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Erie, Pennsylvania. And so I actually networked with the pharmacist out of Harrisburg to bring this to his attention. So sometimes this is closer than you think.
Yeah, well, and it's my understanding I had a recent meeting with other colleagues and some officials in the Harrisburg area who mentioned that the Latino population has really increased in, I think he said Lancaster, Harrisburg, Hershey. So I think, you know, it's not only fascinating, but very important that you have all the different languages as part of this tool, as part of this resource. So one of the things that popped into my mind early, well, first let me tell the audience that if you have a question or a comment, just as a reminder, you can put it into the chat and we'll read it aloud, or you can raise your hand and Jenny will unmute you, and you know, we'll give you the opportunity to share your comments or questions verbally. So, you know, please feel free to do that. And Amy's helping me monitor the chat. Dr. Kocis, at the beginning, you were talking about the importance of asking patients as you're doing their interview, as you're doing their assessment. We customarily ask very routinely, you know, do you smoke tobacco or use any tobacco substances, whether it's, you know, smoking or smokeless tobacco? Do you drink alcohol and how much, you know? But we're not always asking about cannabinoid use. So, you know, do you have any recommendations on how to frame those questions or what questions to ask to kind of explore that part
Yeah,
of medical history?
no, I'm with you there too, because it can be a touchy subject. You know, it depends how you view these. I mean, you know, based on that, I mean, I guess to answer that question, I had got involved with CMS about 3 years ago, where they took my suggested text to apply to one of their rules on listing medications on electronic medical record. and they took my verbiage, which was adding cannabinoids, but also the route of administration.
Mm.
So with that, and because again, I mean, you could have placement on the electronic medical record, but that just means their electronic record or the record, but it doesn't like indicate medication list. So this was a step to put it on the medication list. Now,
Mhm.
I know some institutions, it's a little bit like if you're a federally funded group or VA, but I talked to a colleague out in the VA, they'll place on the medical record just to help screen for drug interactions. Likewise, in our institution, we'll list it, but it's free texted. So if you put a small M or big M for medical, it'll be listed in a completely different. So my other side role, or not role, what side project on this has been to try to standardize. So I did make some progress. I got linked in with the Office of National Coordinator for Health Information IT, and they there was a data element application, so I submitted and they took it. So I've other information going, and it's been a little bit of a slow go, but at least it's moving forward. So to answer your question, I'm hoping that this is not like that this is standard. So it takes that element of
Mhm.
not being routine.
Right. Yeah, no, standardization and kind of recommended language would be really helpful. I would imagine if we asked a patient, do you use cannabinoids either medically or recreationally, that could um, help to bring out some of the information, giving people an opportunity to share what they're comfortable sharing, I guess. But I also, as you were talking, in relation to the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion that you so skillfully explained to us, would be so important to know, the route, the dosing, and all of those things that we do with other medications, to
Yeah,
especially as you talked about the aging population too, older adults, and their decreased ability to absorb and process medications. Really important to know. So are you finding in your practice that a lot of practitioners are using this resource or asking those questions, really analyzing this as they're doing health assessments?
so in that perspective, I would say that I've been more trying to promote it so it's standardized. That would be
Mhm.
my only, I guess, education on it. But to answer that question, earlier in the year, I guess it's going on a year now, early last year, I put together a survey with Penn State Harrisburg Center of Survey Research, and we sent out, I think we have like 1,045 responses for adult age Pennsylvanians, and it was sliced and diced so many different ways. I mean, statistically, it's a sound project, but they added some questions I had, which was, have you ever used CBD?
Mm.
Okay, have you ever used THC? But I wanted questions like, have you ever told your healthcare provider?
Mm.
Okay.
Yep.
So I had like, you could see three things kind of going all at one time simultaneously. And I just sent that for a manuscript. So once it's hopefully accepted, we'll have something to share. But the idea though had questions that one of my colleagues did this, and I thought it was brilliant after it's been done, is ask questions also like how safe do you think non-steroidals are? How safe do you think alcohol is? How safe do you is this? And also then you'd say, how safe do you think CBD is or THC? And when you rank them all together, give an example, maybe it's not accurate, but it kind of gives you an idea here. It's like some felt that non-steroidals were more unsafe than CBD, or CBD was safer, right?
I could see that. I bet people's perceptions of these different types of medications can really vary. I see Amy's joined us, likely because we have a message in the chat.
We do. We have a question and then we have a chat message. I'll ask the question first. Diane is asking Paul if when a patient identifies as using cannabinoids, does your pharmacy do any monitoring of the patient's liver or kidney function to alert physicians that the cannabinoid may be affecting the patient?
Yes, thank you. So with that being said, that's a great question, and that's exactly where I'm trying to go with this. So if she would like, send me a communication through Outlook, and we could have more of a discussion. And but to answer that question, I brought this to Dr. Hull's attention and some other oncologists here, because when I put this, so the database that I have, it started out with AHRQ top 200 medications of 2018. I wanted to do something in a standardized fashion, right? But they don't do that list anymore. And so then what I did was I looked at strengths for the Hershey Medical Center. So it's pediatrics, it's oncology, it's infectious disease. So I then looked and kind of went for like oral medications. So to that point, that's a great question. And I feel like, so to answer this, last Friday, I actually put an application into our health IT. So this could be placed in Cerner, sort of where UpToDate is, as an information source. And then also, I'm really trying to get this standardized on electronic medical record. I already have the solution, because you would say medical cannabis, but it doesn't say like, is it a 3-to-1 or 1-to-3? So I have drop-down box I envision for even, is it inhaled, vaporized, or a brownie like oral absorption. So
Yeah. We have one other question, and then we're going to need to end the session so people have an opportunity to do the evaluation. Cynthia Kiss says, at Hershey Medical Center, some of our patients are ordered Marinol. Some of them are bone marrow transplant patients. Our MDs aware of your site and potential interactions. What are your thoughts on that?
maybe I messed up. The other question I did before, I saw it in the chat. I answered that question for the chat.
Okay.
Now that leads me to think, did I misunderstand the question that Amy had for me? Because that was the one I saw in the text was I reached out to palliative care. I reached out to oncology. I went to the addiction specialist meeting a month ago, 6 weeks ago. An oncologist came up to me there. So, and I'm sorry, Amy, did I answer that question correctly, or was that?
I think there was one in the Q&A, so that we got them kind of flip-flopped, or I did. The other one was, when a patient identifies as a cannabinoid user, does your pharmacy do any monitoring of the patient's liver or kidney function to alert physicians about any adverse effects?
I don't know what the protocol there is. I would say standard of practice would be whatever medication is known.
Okay.
The focus here has been, since my area of expertise is not like treatment. So as you notice, I didn't have any information on indications, use of. So I would say that would be more standard of care and within there. But at the same route, I see more of a, I've been doing this for so long before it was even kind of known, and then all of a sudden it's gaining momentum. So I've seen a big difference even from 2 weeks ago. I'm starting to get a lot of contact from groups or whatnot, and I hope that continues. But that one I would say would be standard of care. I don't work inpatient anymore, and I work in the anticoagulation clinic. Yeah. So again, I have to, my slice of this has been more from, I guess, education / developing a.
Well, congratulations on the development of this tool, as well as all the outstanding work you're doing to provide education and training to others. I'm afraid we are out of time. But as a reminder to all participants, when we end the session, the evaluation will pop up in your browser. So please complete that at your earliest opportunity. And thank you again, Dr. Kocis.
No, it was a pleasure.
Outstanding seminar. Really appreciate it.
No, I enjoyed it.
Take care.
Thank you.